My name is David Godes. I am a researcher at the University of Oslo. I am here today with Walter Mignolo for the first episode of the Decolonial Theory Oral History Project. Walter Mignolo is a professor at the University of Duke, and he has published widely on semiotics, modernity, and coloniality. He is one of the most influential authors in decolonial theorization, and today he will explain some of the basic concepts of decolonial theory. So to start with, Walter, what is the meaning of a decolonial perspective?
Basics of decolonial perspective. We don't. This is very difficult question because there are several perspectives. There is no one perspective or one theory, and that is what I and several other people work on is the perspective that has been opened up by Quijano, Aníbal Quijano, in 1992, introducing the concept of coloniality. That was a kind of breakthrough concept that is being used by other people too in Africa, etc. But to talk about, and that is crucial because it's not just you talk about postmodernism, and more or less postmodernism has a kind of how can I say, not heterogeneous or homogeneous, but in general, the geopolitics of postmodernity is located in Europe and then the North Atlantic and taken up in United States. But the question of the colonial is global. So coloniality for us, coloniality is global because it has touched everybody in the planet. But the responses, they are not one. The way the Africa respond to the coloniality and different, the North Africa or South Africa, the India, where India responded with the post-colonial, South America, etc. So the only thing I can do is just to tell you what is decoloniality in the perspective opened up by Quijano. So in that sense, you cannot, coloniality is already a decolonial concept. It's not a sociological concept, it's not a disciplinary concept, it's undisciplinary concept. That is a need to respond to the kind of domination, let's say, domination that brings exploitation, brings oppression, brings all kind of the value of everything that is not according to the principles and the belief of Eurocentrism. So Eurocentrism, again, is not a question of geography, but it's a way of perceiving the world, and according to that perception of the world, acting on it, that originated in Europe. So originated in Europe, not just economically and political, but also epistemically, aesthetically. I mean, by that I mean that control of knowledge and regulation of knowledge and control of subjectivity and the intersubjective relation. So the coloniality is a perspective. And the second thing, it's a perspective in the same way that psychoanalysis is a perspective. The unconscious doesn't exist. The unconscious exists at the same time that psychoanalysis is created. Mm-hmm. So the coloniality for us doesn't exist because until the concept of coloniality is created. So you cannot talk decolonially without addressing coloniality. Mm-hmm. Coloniality of power, the colonial metric of power. That is our perspective. And two more things. It's a perspective that was born in the third world, because to respond to the need of the third world. And second is address the question of, is based on the geopolitics, the history of South America and the Caribbean, but also it's a perspective on the world order. Uh, and at this time, I would say this: there are three major narratives, macro narratives that kind of structure the world order. They are all heterogeneous. One is the de-Westernization. Even the European now are talking about de-Westernization. There was recently an article in Figaro, Le Figaro Vox, uh, talking about de-Westernization and how Europe should respond to it. So de-Westernization began to appear with the kind of the growth of China, the consolidation of Russia, the consolidation of Iran, the BRICS, etc. So to respond to the Westernization, we have the other set of macro narratives that are kind of re-Westernization.
Mm-hmm.
So that re-Westernization are the narrative that explains from the West what happened in Ukraine and what's happened in Israel. But the de-Westernization narrative have a different perspective,
Okay.
right? And the de-Westernization and the re-Westernization are a state-controlled narrative
Okay.
with the media, of course, serving the state, etc. The decolonial is something of the public sphere, is the people.
Mm-hmm.
That is, for the time being, that doesn't have kind of influence in the state and in the major mass media.
So the colonial theory, as I understand it, talks about modernity and decoloniality as two sides of the same coin that emerged during the colonization of the Americas. So the question is, what happened during the colonization of the Americas that made these two ways of seeing the world, of relating to the world, emerge, and that also created a hierarchy of value, a hierarchy of value for human beings, but also for other species.
Well, according to Quijano, and we follow him, what the basic category that emerges, the category of thought, but not just a kind of philosophical thought, but also with political, economic implication, is the concept of race. So there is no concept of race as we understand it today before the 16th century. And it has two kind of geopolitical location. One is in the Iberian Peninsula. So the kind of the victorious Christianity with the expulsion of with the victory of Granada in 1492 and the expulsion of the Moors and the Jews. Uh, all that is not just a kind of political and military victory, but it's a victory of a narrative. It's a narrative that demonize the Moors and the Jews and make them inferior to the Christian. So we see the consequence today. What the kind of the West think about the Muslim and what the West think about the Jews after 1948 and the Constitution of the State of Israel. So that is one of the pillar of the concept of racism. I have worked on that, how the concept of race was introduced in. The concept of race already existed, but was referred to horses. And in Argentina, we know la raza de pura sangre. So the people who play polo and all of that is kind of raza de pura sangre and related to England, etc. But the culture of the horse in the Arab culture was different. In any event, the dictionary of Covarrubias said describe race as a kind of referring to horses, and then at the end said, dícese también, it is also said of Jews and Moors. And In the New World, the question, and that is was related to religious, of course, but in the New World, there was no uh, religion according to the Christian. So they couldn't have the same criteria to judge the indigenous and the African. And so that is the concept of the kind of the blood, it began to be related to skin. But in any case, the question as Quijano formulated it is not social class, but social classification.
Mm.
And a philosopher, a Jamaican philosopher, Louis Gordon, has a beautiful sentence. Said, in Europe, Europe smells like class after Marx and all that. The Americas smells like race. So that is a kind of crucial category that affects, that impinge not only on the indigenous and the black, but also then the Indian, the Chinese, etc., but also the Muslim and the Jews until 1948. So there is to make a very kind of complex story simple, the concept of race is crucial in the kind of organization, the classification of the world population, not just the governed, but also the people who are governed, but also the people who govern themselves. And I cannot stop by thinking that all the question of Russia and Ukraine and Palestine and Israel and China, the question of race is underneath. But now the question of race is race and races is discussed in the public sphere, but not at the level of the government. Yeah. So that is what that is why Quijano insists that the world order today has its historical foundation, politically, epistemically, economically, in the 16th century. So in that sense, this is the kind of the decolonial perspective on the history of the world order, which indeed, I cannot go into that now, but is the history of the colonial matrix of power. If we have an object of study, as the discipline said, is the colonial matrix of power. In the same way that the psychoanalyst, the main target is the unconscious. Everything is explained through the unconscious. There are other ways to explain, but for us, the colonial matrix of power, for the psychoanalyst is the unconscious. For Max Weber is society. For the Marx is the Marxist is plus value, etc., etc.
Mm.
All right. And still, 4 centuries have gone by, and we still have the concept of race that was constructed, created during the colonizations of the America. We still have it as one of the organizing axes of society. The question is, how has that concept not only been maintained in society, but even expanded to be an organizing principle of society? And what is the role in all this of what you call coloniality?
So, in relation to your previous question, I should say that the constitution of the idea of modernity and the idea of Western civilization, that is idea that began to be built, constituted in the Renaissance, goes together with coloniality. So what is visible is the rhetoric, the narrative of modernity, the narrative of salvation. What is what is not seen is the logic of coloniality. Again, it's like the unconscious and the plus value. You don't see it, right? It's not obvious. It's not in front of you. Right? So modernity is constitutive of coloniality, and decoloniality the response to that. Well, the purpose of classification is to control and dominate and to exploit, because you cannot dominate, you cannot control, you cannot oppress and equal. So in a way, you have to make people, and that was to make people inferior, and that was very, very successful, because a lot of people believe it for a long time that we, as a Latin American third world, are inferior, that women are inferior, women of color are even more inferior, and African descent. So that was the power of the concept of race, which is very different to the concept of class. But then again, you have the intersection of race and class. So a white worker is not the same like a black worker. And then the intersection with gender, as Crenshaw showed. So for Quijano, the fundamental question is race. He recognizes that the question of gender, as we talk today, the distinction between the superiority of the male, the inferiority of the female, have a longer history. But in the 16th century, then become intersected with racism. So a white Spanish woman in Peru, in the vice kingdom of Peru, is superior to a Coya, who was the wife of the Inca. So the gender, race, but for Quijano, race began to rearticulate the world order in the 16th century. So the purpose of classification is that. So, and well, it's very complex, but you can see it today, because coloniality is not only affecting the subjectivity of the people dominated or governed, but affect the subjectivity of the people governing them, that make them believe in their natural superiority. And we see it today all over. And the very interesting thing today is that a lot of people around the world is realizing that. So in de-Westernization, the people who work in de-Westernization, that is a kind of the narrative of the state. So Iranian, Chinese, Russian, Indian, South Asian, they know that there is a kind of this racial prejudice that is kind of injected into the international relation.
So the creation of race to organize human beings into a hierarchy was evidently very powerful. But how was the process through which men in the West were seen as the paragon of not only normality, but also virtue, whilst people in the colonized locations, what we now call the Global South, became exoticized?
And this is very important also today, because the people in what you call here the humans in the empire define themselves as human. And the concept of the human was a kind of criteria to kind of classify people who didn't fit the image of the human. They were kind of the self-fashioned by the people of what you call here the empire. That is one. And the second is they control the narrative. And if you control the narrative, there is a tremendous impact, not only in justifying domination and oppression, but also making people believe in their inferiority, as we said, and blocking the narrative. Because, for example, now, if you look at the conflict between United States and China, all the European and United States media have a tremendous power. It has tremendous power in relation of dissemination, uh, control of the kind of the outlet of the narrative, because they are in English or French or German, who are all imperial language. So to counter those narratives, China have a tremendous difficulty because they have to do it in India, in English, because they do it in narrative for their own people. They do it in Mandarin for their own people. But to have a global impact, they have to do it in English. And also, they have, of course, they have opened up television and blogs in English, etc., around the globe. But still, uh, the control of the narrative is the control of the narrative is still in the hand of Western power, state, other institution, media, etc. So that is the. We can say today that that what we call the hybrid war, the control of narrative is fundamental. It's not just what happened in the kind of the materiality of business and war and military means, all of that. But the question is to control the narrative to justify and legitimate what you do.
And to expand on this, what you're saying about the media, what is the role of the contemporary entertainment industry in solidifying, reifying these categories that organize society, the classification of humans in races? What role do they play, these industries of entertainment?
Oh, that is a big. Well, this is a big question, but I will just say two things. One of the role of the entertainment industry, that as you can say, maintaining and strengthening the divide and hierarchy between human groups, that is crucial. And that I think is, but also the entertainment, the descendant entertainment. For example, Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart is fundamental to kind of counter those narratives through humor. So humor have a tremendous power there, but still there is uh, not too many people. Even if a lot of people watch Jon Stewart, there is more people that watch other kind of TV program, the 800 channel of TV that now you can watch. So that's one point. The second point is that the multiplication of TV, for example, is the way of blocking people thinking. So people expect the television to give them entertainment. And when you kind of expect the other to entertain you, you stop thinking. So that is the third and most, I think, perverse consequences of not just entertainment, but the social media. It's like technology, and the digital technology has been, I don't know if it's made or not, but I would say that it's made in a great measure to, number one, for business. Second, to the new strategies to control and submission of people. And the third one is to prevent thinking. Because entertainment and the social media, people in the social media, people don't think. They insult and kind of show pictures and talk in sentences, in short sentences. But the question of investigation and thinking and arguing, that is going. So one of the important function of decoloniality for us is to keep on working on the pleasure and the beauty of thinking, which is kind of being killed by the entertainment, by the mass media, by the artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, what is the G5 chat, etc. So that deserves another conversation, but it's a good example of how coloniality is being rewinding in itself in the name of modernity. Because that is all kind of progress, development, improvement for the human being, but at the same time is improving the way of controlling and oppressing and submission, right? Well, it's very difficult to talk about those things in half an hour, but I think I give you an idea.
Now, for all the clarity, the concepts, the tools, the inspiration that decolonial theory or theories provide, there is still criticism of it. Certain scholars have said that decolonial theorists are recolonizing or are also colonialists because they are appropriating the knowledge of other people and constructing abstract castles in Western universities, whilst not joining the fight, the struggle of colonized people in the global South. And some of those scholars or those critics, Rivera Cusicanqui, for instance, in Bolivia, they have mentioned you and they have mentioned other decolonial theorists. So what is your take on that criticism?
Yeah, that is true. There is that and much more. A kind of critique of the colonial work. But what can you do? We don't waste time to kind of to counter the critique. We just keep on working because we believe in what we are doing, and not just as the follower of Quijano, but people in Africa, people in even now it's kind of growing up a little bit in Central Asia, even in Europe. That is in Europe, as you may know, this is a work that is being done by immigrants, recent immigrant or people that are kind of the family came went to Europe for a long time, and United States too. This kind of thinking is keep on going. That's one thing. The second thing is a lot of people, generally Marxist and postmodern Marxist, they think that the decolonial is to kind of celebrate the indigenous people. The indigenous people are doing themselves. Now they have tremendous intellectual power, artists. They have their own medium. They are scholars. They go to university. They publish an important publishing houses. I can give you a name, but that's so the question, the non-indigenous, in relation to the indigenous, is just to support that. But we have another, for example, when they reclaim the land, well, we have to support that, of course. But we have another dimension, another sphere to work. And one of the spheres to work is in the social sphere in relation to the forces of domination. I tell you an anecdote. A student of mine, an undergraduate student, went to Peru and then came back. And so she was in relation with kind of the indigenous people and poor people. And she asked me, Professor Mignolo, what can I do to help? And I think, well, Esther, if you want to help these people, do it here. Because they know how to do it there. You don't have to do anything there, though you cannot tell them what to do. If you wanna do something there, go there and say, what can I do for you? But don't go there as a savior. If you are a savior, work here, kind of confronting the people that are creating the condition for those people to be poor and to be kind of racialized and all these kind of things. So there is but also, fourth, decoloniality is not a university question. Decoloniality, decolonization in Africa, in the Third World during the Cold War, and Quijano was an activist. He was a professor of sociology. He's an activist. So all the things emerged outside of the university. And we keep it, but it come into the university. When we come into the university, well, the university is a place not to decolonize the university, but to do decolonial work at the university. Because, I mean, to talk about decolonizing the university is a kind of a dream. You have to know the history of the university from the Renaissance on 500 years today related to the corporations. You cannot decolonize the university. On top of that, if you want to decolonize the university, you want to have the cake and eat it. Because to decolonize the university means I want to keep the university, but decolonial. No, you have to think education in a different, and we are doing that. So there is a lot of kind of confusion. I call that the kind of the postmodern confusion in relation to decoloniality. And so we are working, we are just keeping our work rolling. And as Don Quixote used to say, the dogs are barking, Sancho. It is a sign that we are horsebacking, that we are moving. So, and I would say also that we don't pay any attention to this critique because it's a waste of time. I mean, it's a waste of time to criticize among ourselves. But this is the kind of the modern mentality that I want to have the kind of the control of the criticism, etc. So we don't pay attention to that. We pay attention to where are the forces that are control us. So Marxists and postmodern, they are not controlling us. They are kind of, I don't know, they are jealous or they, I don't know, they don't like what we say because we are not saying things that they would like to say, etc., etc. So the grassroots, I mean, that's the thing. We have nothing to tell the grassroots movement what they have to do. And they don't pay any attention to us. And they don't pay any attention to the postmodern and Marxist critiques. So they have, that's, well, there is more to say.
My last question is related to what you were saying about what we as scholars can do about coloniality. And in my latest book, together with Katia Franco, Profiting from Paulo, Victimhood, Memory, and Consumerism, we talk about the coloniality informing the entertainment industry. We research Narcos and how people from Latin America, from Colombia specifically, are exoticized. There's so much violence in Latin America, the show says, because we are exotic, violent people. So the question here is, how should I help undo or decolonize the representations in mass media, in entertainment, and even in social media?
Again, yeah, the first point I would say, well, yeah, this is one example of how disaster are disaster of all kind. I mean, not just kind of ecological disaster, but the question of Palestine and Israel, etc., and many others. How are kind of the entertainment, the media, kind of live on that. They are kind of, they need this kind of disaster and victims and people suffering to kind of transform tragedies into entertainment. That's one thing. And the second thing is it's a question of controlling narrative. And I would say here that the question of your book and people, scholars like you who are activists also, and the decolonial, we don't have the means, and we have to think seriously about the means, the media, the blog, to counter the narrative. So we do what we can, but we are very limited in relation to the Colombian TV and the Colombian newspapers and the Colombian social media, etc. No? So, and I think how can I help to undo the effect of colonial representation? That is the question of keep on working, creating a different narrative, not just critiquing the narrative, but we have to create a different kind of narrative. And that's one of the decolonial goal. The decolonial goal is not just to understand how we are oppressed or the people are oppressed, but also create a different narrative. And that is the big task. A lot of people around the world knows that. I mean, I am not the only one who knows that. But at the same time, a lot of people around the world knows the practical limitation we have to uh, to make the counter, not the counter narrative, but the decolonial narrative that we are creating to circulate. Not to convince people, we are not missionaries, but to kind of make those narratives available to people who would like to take it, or the people who identify with this narrative and continue to propagate that kind of perspective.
Well, Walter, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for talking to me, for logging into Zoom. I wish we had the possibility to do this interview in person, but that's one of the benefits of the technology that connects us, and we need connection more than ever. And the good news is that these ideas will be spread to many more people that can see them online. So thank you once more, and I hope to see you soon.